Well, it is my pleasure to be chatting today with the Honourable Carmel Sepuloni. She is Deputy Prime Minister, has a range of portfolios, including Minister of Auckland and Social Development and Employment. She's the member for Kelston in West Auckland. Deputy Prime Minister, kia ora.
Kia ora, Andrew.
Talofa, malo ilele. Thank you so much for your time today. First up, I wanted to ask you what might be the most difficult question of your campaign so far. Hopefully the most difficult question today. You're the first Pacifica Deputy Prime Minister, first person of Tongan descent in Parliament. Tongan food, Samoan food. If you had to pick one, what's it going to be?
No, you don't do that. Otherwise, I'd be in big trouble. There's lots of similarities between the food, and so the overlapping foods are my favourite.
I imagine it gets complicated with cheering for rugby teams and that sort of thing as well.
Well, you just take flags for both countries, and then whoever's doing well and scoring, you pull that out, and then... And if otherwise, if you're feeling sympathetic towards the other, then you pull it. You just have to find that balance.
Yeah, exactly. Foot in both camps in that regard. Yeah. Now, first entering Parliament back in 2008. Now, a week is a long time in politics. 15 years, though. What inspired you, first of all, to get involved with politics?
Well, I did have 3 years out from 2011, 2014, so I do refer to that as my sabbatical. It's probably a good thing.
Yeah.
Certainly what I saw growing up and my own experiences made me a little bit political. Growing up in a town where many of the community lost their jobs when the freezing works shut down, seeing firsthand and hearing the political narrative of that time, which I paid a lot of attention to. And then getting older and studying at university, reflecting on my own upbringing and learning through university about the inequities that exist. I'm the middle child, so I say I'm always seeking fairness. Everything is, there's lots of unfairness in this world when you're the middle child. But very genuinely, that's what drove me to politics, is that pursuit of fairness, wanting to be part of resolving and addressing the inequities that exist, and just wanting to make this world a good place for all communities.
Perhaps best known for your role as a Social Development Minister. Anything in particular that you're especially proud of in this area?
Lots of things, actually. I am very proud of the fact that we invested the $3 billion into increasing benefits. That has helped us address poverty. But alongside the income support for those that are on welfare, I've always recognised the importance of support for upskilling and training and for support to get into work. For some people, it's not that easy, and there's a number of barriers that you need to actually support with addressing. And so we've put a significant amount of money towards things like apprenticeship boost, mana and mahi, he potama rangatahi, Māori trades training, and that's all about supporting those who may be on benefit or on the brink of coming onto benefit, so that they can actually get into meaningful work for themselves and for their whānau.
Significant challenges still faced by the Pacifica community. What do you see to be some of those remaining challenges or things where there's still inequities?
Well, certainly still inequities with our health outcomes, with our educational outcomes. Pacific peoples are more likely to live in lower income households, to be working hard jobs that don't pay as well, and more likely to live in housing that is perhaps not adequate or is harder for them to afford because of the other issues around income adequacy. And so in saying that, I do want to celebrate our Pacific community as well. We have challenges, but also we contribute so much and have contributed so much to Aotearoa since the arrival of the first Pacific migrants, and lots of success stories for Pacific people as well. So yes, the inequities are real, but also we have a number of prominent Pacific people who have achieved beyond their families' wildest expectations. And I feel like there's an increasing number of Pacific people that are doing well.
Something else which is very important, of course, to Pacifica culture is faith. And as I'm sure you're aware, Rhema Media listeners and viewers, they're coming from a Christian faith perspective. Is that something which is important to you? Where do you sit in that area in terms of your personal faith?
Yes, so certainly, I mean, for just about all of us as Pacific people, it's a very big part of who we are and the lives that we're born into. I've had a very mixed religious background. We started off Anglican and then ended up going to an evangelical church when we were growing up.
Yep.
My Samoan family belong to the Whakasa Church, which is probably the most well-attended Samoan church.
Mm-hmm.
My Tongan family are Wesleyan Methodist, and my Fijian husband and his family are Catholic.
Wow.
And so I would be in trouble if I tried to associate myself with one denomination, I think.
There's certainly some religious diversity represented there. Now, being a politician, certainly a senior politician, a senior minister, not an easy job. What has been perhaps the most difficult thing that you have faced in your political career so far?
I think in recent years in particular, with the increased attention and I guess, through things like social media and whatnot, it has intensified.
Yep.
COVID has intensified the feelings out there with the uncertainty and the decisions that had to be made. And so that's made everything feel a lot more intense than what it was back in 2008 when I entered. When I first started in 2008, we were still working off Blackberries.
Yep.
There were not... you were not at risk of being videoed wherever you went. You didn't have phones with cameras. It wasn't something that we had to contend with. But now it's very different.
Always on in that regard.
Yeah.
Now, the Labour government, of course, got a clear majority at the moment. Now, this is a unique opportunity, unlikely to happen in an MMP environment again in our lifetime, although, anything's possible. Particularly that opportunity without the pragmatism and the compromise that so often comes with a coalition government. Some people may feel that there's perhaps been a missed opportunity with having this absolute majority in the last term, a missed opportunity to implement some transformational change in society. What would your comments be to that?
I think that we have been able to make some transformational change. Some of the things I talked about with regards to the welfare system are indicative of that. Some of the changes that we've made are longer term.
Yep.
The very important health reforms, the reforms to tertiary education. Some of that work's not finished, and it was never going to be able to be done and completed in one term. And so I think that what we have done is set really important platforms for progress, but we want to be able to continue that work, and that's why we're fighting to win this election.
It has been a tough few years for all of us here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and perhaps the last 3 years are tougher than ever. How do you feel that the average Kiwi is in a better place because of the Labour government?
Well, I certainly know that the reality for people is that they are feeling the pressures of things like the cost of living. At the same time, I know that if we hadn't implemented some of the measures that we have consistently implemented over our time in government, then we would have been worse placed to be able to, or not as well placed to be able to deal with some of the challenges that we're facing, whether it be the consistent lifts to the minimum wage, whether it be the increases to things like working for families and benefits, a range of different things that we implemented before and during and then continue to, that make a difference to people's everyday lives. And so I'm not going to pretend that it's not tough at the moment, though, Andrew. It is tough for a lot of families at the moment.
And honestly tough to campaign as the incumbent government when there's a cost of living crisis and it's technical recession in that regard. A lot of New Zealanders, as I mentioned, are finding it tough. What would your pitch be to say how you feel that their lives will be better? What can Labour offer them for a better future for what's
So we
coming
know
up?
the forecasts, and we know that things like interest rates start to return to some kind of normality next year. And so we are basically riding what is a very difficult wave at the moment. But we also know that the economy is still something like 6.3% better than what it was pre-COVID. We know that tourism has started to return, exports are up, employment rates are at an all-time high. We've got more New Zealanders going into work than we ever have. And so all of those things are really positive. That doesn't mean that people don't experience some difficulty and challenges in their own lives. But this, those types of things I've just mentioned put us in a good place to be able to move forward. And so we're hoping the sun starts shining next year, basically.
Exactly, as do we all. Can I re-ask that more specifically, perhaps?
Yeah.
Because, yes, we're in the downside of an economic cycle at the moment, but specifically, not just, well, hey, the sun will come out tomorrow, but what specifically about Labour's policies and promises will mean a better future than what, say, the other opposition parties are offering?
I guess, firstly, just finding that fiscal balance is going to be really important. And so we've spoken to this quite broadly around the fact that every decision that we've made is taking into consideration what the economic implications could be. And so we've been careful that we don't stoke inflation by any of the initiatives that we put in place. And so I do acknowledge Grant Robertson for that. Things like big tax cuts, I can't say, that they will provide that balance that we need to continue to have to keep the economy well placed. And so that is of concern, of course, to us. But also the policies that we have announced recently through the campaign, things like free dental care for under 30s, I think they show a vision for New Zealand. We've said this is a step in that direction. We want to head towards a country where at some point we actually have universal dental care for New Zealanders. We know that this is one of the things that is most expensive for individuals and families. And so, we're trying to look long term with regards to some of the investments that should be made and starting to get things moving. We've also been very aspirational with respect to some of the transport projects that we've announced for Auckland. They are long term, but if you don't put a stake in the ground and say this is what we're going to do, then actually they never happen, and you end up in a situation where you have the congestion like we face at the moment in Auckland.
Certainly difficult to do, I suppose, what is the traditional election year lottie scramble in the current economic conditions in that regard. But according to current polling, Labour certainly seems less popular than it was 3 years ago when, as I mentioned, the absolute majority. Why do you think that is?
Well, let's be honest. 3 years ago, that was a bit of an anomaly when it comes to any election. That was a landslide with a very popular leader at the time, Jacinda, off the back of what had been very challenging times. And New Zealand, I think at that point, we're very trusting of the government, and I think a lot of people were really appreciative of the steps that had been taken. And then since then, what we've seen is internationally, and New Zealand is obviously not immune to this, the other challenges arise, like the cost of living, increases to fuel and a range of other things. And so that's put pressure on families, and then it's created uncertainty. And so now they're looking around for what their options are, and you can understand why that would be the case.
Over the last few months in particular, you've had to say goodbye to a few of your caucus colleagues. That must be a very difficult process as well. Who will you miss the most, do you think? Again, a tough choice. Or who will you miss in particular? Anyone come to mind?
Oh, I'm going to miss a lot of them. You really get used to working with people that become friends. Sometimes you see more of them than you do your own family. Sometimes they become like family, particularly within our Pacific caucus. And so, Aupito is going, and he's been there the whole duration of time that I've been there. He thinks he's like a brother to us, but actually he's more like an uncle. And so we're going to miss our Uncle Aupito. Porto's a very good friend of mine, and we've been through a lot together, and so I'm going to miss her. Stuart Nash, we came in at 2008, me and him and many others, including Chris Hipkins and Grant Robertson. Me, Stuart, and Calvin also went out in 2011, so we were that year, that election period's retreads, we call ourselves, and then we all made it back in. And so I'm going to miss my colleagues.
I mean, there have been perhaps more than most, a lot of valedictory speeches in Parliament just before Parliament broke for the campaign, projecting into the future, and who knows how long this will be. But thinking about your own farewell speech, what do you think will be some of the highlights as you look back at your political career? Not saying when that in particular that's going to be.
So I don't want to think about that too early.
Certainly.
But certainly it's been a privilege to serve as the MP for Kelston, and having the trust of my electorate would be up there. And I'd want to talk a little bit about some of the cases that I've taken up as an electorate MP and the difference that has made. I'd also be talking about some of the achievements that I've been able to get over the line as a minister, whether that be things like I've mentioned earlier, whether it be maternal birth injuries cover from ACC. So there'd be a range of things that I'd want to put in there. There'll be a lot of funny stories when I do get to tell my valedictory speech, but I won't give that away today, Andrew.
In terms of political opportunities, regardless of what happens in the election this year, First Pacifica Prime Minister, is that an aspirational goal?
Well, the aspiration is to win the election,
yes,
and to continue supporting Chris Hipkins to be the Prime Minister as his deputy. I think I make a very good deputy Prime Minister, and I don't have any aspirations to go beyond that.
Yeah, okay, no, good answer in that regard. Now, there'll be people listening to this at the moment who will be voting Labour this election. There will also be some who have perhaps already decided to vote for some other party. But there will be people listening and watching this at the moment who are generally undecided voters. What would you say to them to encourage them to give Labour another chance and to give their party vote to Labour?
I guess I would say look at the track record and also take a good look at the policies. Which political parties are responding to the challenges of the now, but also looking to the future? If we don't take seriously challenges like climate change and what our future economy will look like in that global context, then what we're going to find is down the track, we're going to be left behind. And so what kind of country do we want to live in now, but what kind of country do we want our children and grandchildren to grow up in? I think that Labour's got the policies that demonstrate a commitment to both the present and the future. And so I would ask people to take a look at those policies and weigh them up.
Well, Carmel Sepuloni, thank you so much for your commitment to serving Aotearoa New Zealand. Thank you for your mahi. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us today. Kia ora.
Kia ora. Thank you, Andrew.